So I've been to this location several times. This is a little city park down the ways from us in a non-incorporated municipality. I've showed this many times. I don't know, I say many times, probably 3 or 4. It's very old. I would think maybe 1800s, my guess, if they built this. Now the water comes out of the hillside here, and what they did was they kind of dammed it up. So this is where you would get your water. This is over here on this side is where you would do your laundry, probably, I would guess. They busted down for some reason, the people in this area. This is supposed to be dammed up quite a bit higher, so this side will be deeper. But you can see every time somebody tries to fix it, they knock it down. So I don't know why they do that. It should be significantly higher, maybe up to here. But there's a pipe that comes out on the hillside, a little, I don't know, iron or steel, I don't know, comes out of the hillside. I would suspect my well feeds this. My water well is way up on the hill, maybe 100 feet if I had to guess. I'm not sure, I remember. Now today it's pretty murky. I've never seen it this dark and murky. I can't see the bottom. But yesterday we had a huge rain. Maybe that's why it's so murky today. But usually it's just crystal clear. I've seen people get water out of this. On a side note, I've gotten firewood from here. There was a tree that fell down a few years ago, and I got the whole tree. I mean, it was huge. I would imagine the trunk of the tree was 4 to 5 feet in diameter. It's still up there, the trunk. Nobody could cut it. I tried. I cut it off in pieces, but eventually I just gave up on it. But the limbs on that tree were as big as a tree. I mean, that tree right there would be a good representation of one of its limbs. Well, while I was here, I was showing everybody around, and there was a tree up here on the cliff that was leaning way over. I always thought it would fall down, and it did. It fell down. You can see all the branches on the ground here, I would imagine. You can see that someone's already got that firewood. They've trimmed some of this up already. I would imagine it landed over there on that spring, but right there, I hope you can see, they've cut it all up. So I was telling you about the EPA. So the Clean Water Act is a law that was passed by Congress, and it gives the EPA to define clean water. This is what I have a problem with the EPA is Congress makes laws, but then says the EPA can specify what it is. Well, the EPA is not representatives of us. They're appointed. I have no jurisdiction over them. I can't vote them out of office. Nothing I can do about it. So when Congress says we're going to give EPA full discretion on water cleanliness, then it really is just up to whoever's running the EPA to determine what they want to do. I would prefer that Congress do their job and vote. Well, we'd like to have water quality at this level, blah, blah, blah. So 2 administrations ago, the EPA put a lot of restrictions on water, and I was really concerned about it. I had an old well, hand pump well. It was only 15 feet deep. Back then I thought, man, could they restrict me from using that? And the answer was yes, they could. They have determined the federal government owns all water. Now here in Missouri, prior to this, allowed you to have your own water rights. If water's on your property, it's yours. Whereas there's other states that say, no, it's the state. I think Oregon says water is theirs. California, I know, says water is theirs. I don't know, maybe even Tennessee and I don't know, several other states. Now some states say that you have to have permission to use that water on your property. Whereas other states will say, the state owns it, but you can use it. I'm a big fan of Missouri. Missouri seems to be on my side every time an issue comes up. Well, back I guess in 2012, the EPA said no, the federal government owns it. And it went through a litany of lawsuits through the Supreme Court. What they were saying is if you wanted to build a house and they determined it as a wetland, you couldn't build that house. So you own property, but you couldn't do anything with that property. But the same thing with farming. If your cows were drinking out of an old lake or pond that you had, and the EPA determined that was wetlands, you couldn't do anything about it. I don't remember all the specifics, but I know Iowa was having a lot of issues with this. Iowa was big in pig farms. I don't know if they still are, but when I was in business, I drove through Iowa all the time and just pig farms everywhere. One of the big complaints was all these wetlands that the EPA determined as a wetland. I mean, imagine that, Iowa, farmland. It's all farmland. But EPA says, no, it's wetland. They were saying these ponds and creeks, ditches were being polluted by pigs. Now, I know a lot of people are in my comment section can say, yeah, it saved the planet. I could understand if it was polluting something like this. And I would suspect that I would want tests done to make sure this is being done correctly. But if it's your own pond, how can the EPA tell you what to do with your own pond? It's not hurting anything. I remember I rented a place, 8 acres, and it had a small pond on it. And it was specifically built to water the garden. It was way up on a hill. Well, it's actually kind of like this, and they just kind of sectioned off, water filled up into it. It was just a cliff, and then they could take a hose and just trickle their garden. But believe it or not, that pond, it wasn't even that big, would have been regulated by this 2012 EPA requirement. Now, it's not a law, it's a regulation. Laws are written by Congress. And this all came about, I think, in, I don't know, either Iowa or South Dakota. Maybe it was South Dakota, North Dakota, one of those areas. There was a farmer had a dip in his property. And in the springtime, when all the snow melted, it would fill up with water, and his cows would get stuck in it. And so he was just going to fill it in. Well, the EPA said, no, you can't do that because it's considered wetland. The next administration came in, 2016, and they abolished that. It went back to pre-2012 requirements. You could have water on your property, it's fine. If you want to drink out of it, fine. If you want to feed your cows, fine. If you want to fish, fine, whatever. Now we fast forward into this administration. The EPA stopped someone in Idaho from building a house, and they said it was wetlands. So this guy bought a property in Idaho, decided he wanted to build a house, and the EPA said, no, you can't do it. Of course, the property owner sued, and now it's in the Supreme Court. So what did the EPA do? They redefined this Clean Water Act, and it's back to 2012 requirements. A lot of people in my comments section will tell me that the EPA has no control over anything unless Congress makes a law. Apparently, the EPA was sued, and the Supreme Court said that EPA can't make any more regulations without Congress making a law and then saying the EPA needs to enforce this law. This just recently happened. I made a video not long ago about wood stoves, and everybody said, don't worry about it, this is all gonna go away. The Supreme Court's already ruled on it. Yet the EPA continues to do things like this. They're not listening to the Supreme Court. I've said this in previous videos. Who enforces the Supreme Court's decisions? No one. If a judge in this area said, you can't do something on your property, then you went ahead and did it anyways, well, then the judge would put a warrant out for your arrest, the police would come and arrest you, then you would have to go through trial, contempt of court, and all that stuff. But when the Supreme Court makes a decision, the highest court in the land says the president or the EPA or anybody can't do anything, who enforces it? Well, Congress is supposed to, but Congress doesn't. Every impeachment that we've had has been overturned by the Senate. So we have an impeachment, Congress says, no, we want this to go to trial, so the Senate holds a trial, and they always find the president not guilty. So impeachment doesn't work in this country. We've had, 3 examples now? 4 examples. I think there's been 4 examples. Almost forgot the earliest one. And all of them have been overturned. Presidents can break the law. Presidents can violate Supreme Court decisions. Nothing happens. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. During the pandemic, this administration said they were going to allow renters to live in rented homes that have not paid their rent. So it was a renters and mortgage moratorium is what he called it. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, that's unconstitutional. You cannot tell people they can live in homes that they don't own or they're not paying for. Well, the president said, I don't care what the Supreme Court said. They went ahead and forced landlords to allow people to live in their homes that weren't paying rent. Now, I think that was all settled and everybody got paid up to date. But imagine that. Here you are, a landlord. You're relying on that paycheck as your retirement plan. And the president just said, no, you don't get paid until I pay you. And so a year or 2 later, they send you a check. Well, by then, you've already had to sell the house because you couldn't afford the upkeep. And remember, a lot of these states have what called slumlord requirements, that if you don't have everything perfect, so they're having to continue to do maintenance on houses they're not getting paid for. So what this means is if you own a pond in Missouri, which I'm going to use Missouri as an example, because in Missouri, a pond is yours. The state doesn't own it. Nobody owns it. Well, now the federal government owns it, and they can regulate what you do with it. And they do regulate what you do with it. They can say that a creek going through your property, you cannot have water from. I think in Oregon, they actually say that you cannot take water from a creek. That's a state law. Well, now federal law can say you cannot take water from a creek that's going through your property. And so there's a couple other things I've talked about in the recent history. California. And I knew the federal government would eventually follow suit with California. California said they want to take water from Louisiana. So they want to build this big pipeline, take it from the Mississippi River in Louisiana and bring it all the way over to Lake Mead and, that other lake, I forget what it's called, and fill it up because they're running out of water. Now, imagine this. You live in a desert, you decide you want to be a farmer, and you water crops in a desert, and you run out of water. What can we do? Let's take it from Louisiana. Well, it was determined that if they take it from Louisiana, that their swamplands would dry up and fall off into the ocean. Apparently, the swamplands of Louisiana continuously fall off into the ocean. But the Mississippi River replenishes that constantly. Then recently, California either wrote a law or passed a law, I think they just passed a law, that said that private wells are no longer yours. So certain counties decided that if you own a well, that they're going to charge you for the water you use. So imagine that. You pay to dig the well, you pay the electric to run the well, and then you have to pay the city, who has done nothing, for the water that you're pumping out of it. So you have to put a meter on your well, and each month you have to go out to your well, record how much water you use, and then send a check to the city or the county. Now, a lot of people in the comment section said, no, that was only for big farmers. No, I think it was in September. They decided to get rid of the big farmer one. Just as I said in a previous video, the federal government would follow suit with this. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, so we'll see what happens. So if you click this up next box, take you a video that I made yesterday. So if I can inspire you to find some freedom so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.